Ben Hodges is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General, former commander at the U.S. Army Europe. Welcome to our program, General Hodges.
Daniel, thank you again for the privilege.
Ukraine has successfully developed its own cruise missile with a range more than 600 miles, far enough to reach Moscow, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. How could this development change the balance of power at the negotiating table?
Well, I think this is a capability that enables Ukraine to strike strategic targets, whether we're talking about oil and gas infrastructure, major headquarters, logistics sites, all of the things necessary to help regain the initiative for Ukraine and to undermine Russia's advantage of mass. So I think this is a great development, and I would imagine that when it comes to negotiations, of course, the Russians will want to see a ceasefire that limits attacks against infrastructure. So this is an important development for Ukraine.
Moreover, Ukraine would produce 100,000 long-range munitions this year. Can Ukraine outproduce Russia in specific military equipment?
I think, yes. Remember that Russia uses a lot of things it gets from Iran, North Korea, and China. So if somehow we, the West, could limit Russia's ability to buy or import those things from those the countries supporting them, then Ukraine could conceivably actually outproduce the Russian Federation, which is maybe for some difficult to believe, but of course you know that Ukraine was always the heart of the defense industry of the Soviet Union back in the old days. So the fact that you have a technological expertise in Ukraine that is better than in much of the rest of Russia, actually it should not be a surprise.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump says that he is the only person in the world who is able to stop Vladimir Putin. However, Russia continued to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones after declared ceasefire deal in the air. Do you see this Russia's attack on Ukraine violation of ceasefire as Vladimir Putin's slap in the face of Donald Trump?
Well, it shows that Russia clearly has no interest in actually observing a ceasefire. They never have. They actually have no interest in living or reaching a legitimate peace settlement where Ukraine is allowed to survive as a sovereign state, making decisions for itself. It also, frankly, I think shows, unfortunately, that the Kremlin has zero respect for the United States, for my president, and for this process, because they feel pretty certain that they're going to get what they want from the White House, which is why Ukraine and Europe have got to take matters into their own hands to make sure that they do not end up in a situation where Russia gets everything it's asking for. And by that, I mean Ukraine, Poland, Germany, UK, France are not obligated to accept whatever the Kremlin and the White House may come up with, because they're not a party to the actual negotiations, not in a meaningful way. The president has my president has enormous leverage over Russia should he choose to use it. He could do things that would crush Russia's oil and gas industry, make it impossible for Russia to make the money necessary to import weapons and drones from other countries. He could also open up the floodgates of aid to Ukraine, ammunition, weapons, and so on. So the president has enormous leverage over Russia, but so far he's choosing not to use it, instead having his lead negotiator, Mr. Witkoff, parrot Russian talking points. So I'm confused. I don't know how this is in America's best interest.
Also, Vladimir Putin has rejected U.S. proposal on a full ceasefire in Ukraine, but has agreed to partial ceasefire in the air. Don't you think that Vladimir Putin is just giving Donald Trump enough, just enough to declare any kind of success in negotiations, but not enough to actually end the war?
Well, certainly, I have read enough reports from other observers who believe that the Kremlin is playing us, that they're doing exactly what you just described, Daniel, as a way to kind of stall by time, keep these things going, keep the president interested. At some point, though, I think President Trump, at some point, is going to realize or accept or have to face that Russia is actually not interested in doing this, and that they are mocking the United States. So at some point, he will become angry enough that he will then say, okay, and then use that leverage he has. I hope that this comes soon. I hope that the Russians continue to, or that at some point the Russians will overplay their hand and then anger the president so much that he then says, because he sees that this deal that he wanted so bad is moving further and further away because Russians have no intention of actually making the deal, then the president would use the leverage he has to bring Russia, to force Russia to actually negotiate in good faith. I just don't see that happening with Mr. Witkoff as the lead negotiator right now.
And do you feel that Vladimir Putin can sustain another confrontation with U.S. President Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, what do you mean a confrontation? So far, I don't see any confrontation that has been a risk or a threat to President Putin, unfortunately. That's what I'm saying. I hope that the Russians will overplay their hand enough that finally there is a confrontation, because there hasn't been a confrontation, as far as I can see, between the U.S. and Russia.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Russia has set maximalist demands for any agreement, including end to arms supplies from the U.S. to Ukraine and end for the U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine. However, White House hasn't agreed to such limits yet for Ukraine aid. Does this mean that Donald Trump doesn't want to make large concessions to Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's important that the administration has not just completely rolled over on everything that the Russians have asked for. So that gives me some hope that the administration is not totally naive to what Russia is and who Russia is. And look, I take the president at his word, my president at his word, that he really does want the fighting to stop. I mean, he has a long record of being against forever wars. So I think on an emotional level, I take him at his word. The problem is that the idea of an end to the fighting, with Russia is involved, is not really going to be an end to the fighting. That Russia won't stop as long as Vladimir Putin is alive until they have achieved their objective of the destruction of Ukraine as a state. And so, unless they are compelled to do otherwise.
From your perspective, for how long Vladimir Putin can lead Donald Trump by the nose, by giving him just enough to declare any kind of success, but not enough to actually reach his objective, Trump's objective to end the war?
I don't know. I can't predict. I can't predict that because it really depends entirely. Since the U.S. has all the advantages here, I cannot predict and won't predict how much longer until the president finally says enough is enough, if he will.
Also, despite Russia's attacks on Ukraine, the U.S. still hoping that a broad ceasefire, full ceasefire deal can be reached before Easter, before the April 20th. What are the chances for that, a full ceasefire before Easter?
Well, do you mean an agreement to a ceasefire or an actual ceasefire.
Actual
I'd say,
ceasefire, yeah.
yeah, I'd say there's zero chance of that being done before Easter because a ceasefire that's in name only is not in my view, is not really a ceasefire because Russia has demonstrated that they will violate it immediately unless there is a force there to compel them to live up to their agreement. So that's why I'm skeptical about any sort of agreement that happens in just the next few weeks. I mean, they may get an agreement, but if there's no force in place to compel compliance, it's not going to be worth anything. I mean, I don't think anybody seriously believes that Russia will not begin testing the ceasefire and our willingness to enforce it immediately. So, that's why getting a ceasefire implementation force trained and ready and deployed and in place is critical. And there's not going to be, at least I don't think, I think Ukrainian government will be reluctant to enter into real negotiations without having a ceasefire that is correctly observed by the Russians in place, because otherwise they would never be able to trust that Russia would live up to whatever the agreement is from the negotiations. So I look at this whole process, we're in three phases. The first phase is where we are now, the preparation phase. All of these talks, all of these discussions going on in Saudi Arabia, in Kyiv, in the White House, in Paris, in London, in Brussels, all of this is the preparation phase that is designed to get to a ceasefire. Now, this is not clean. It's not quite that black and white, but I'm describing this in broad stages. So this first stage or phase is the preparation phase. The second phase is the actual agreement and declaration of a ceasefire with a force that is deployed that can compel Russia to live up to the ceasefire. And then the third phase, now you can have real negotiations about the long-term outcome of this conflict with Ukrainian sovereignty being protected. This is why President Zelensky has correctly said he needs a security guarantee, because he knows that Russia has zero chance that Russia lives up to any agreement where there's not some sort of security apparatus in place that would force Russia to live up to it. So if you send some people in white SUVs, observers with baseball caps, the Russians will dismiss them just like they did after Minsk ceasefires, no matter how brave these OSCE observers are. If you send in a UN force with blue helmets, they will be disregarded immediately. It has to be a real force that has rules of engagement that allow them to inflict consequences on Russians immediately when the Russians violate the ceasefire. This is going to take months to get that in place, unfortunately.
You just mentioned about the deterrent force. British special forces have been put on high alert to prepare for the potential deployment to Ukraine, according to the paper. How can allies, European allies, perform in Ukraine without the US backstop?
Well, look, Europe, when they work together, has enormous economic advantage over Russia. So there's economic leverage already that's there. And then when you start adding together the defense industries of all of European countries, it's way more than what Russia has. And then when you add together military capabilities of European nations, it's more than what Russia has, except in terms of nuclear weapons. So yes, of course, I wish that the United States would be a part of this in some way, but if they're not, that doesn't change the requirement. That doesn't eliminate the need or the threat just because the U.S. chooses not to be a part of it. And so this is going to be a real test, a test of whether or not Europe can meet the moment that affects its security for decades to come. Yes, they can do it. But only if they summon the political will. And I think some countries have shown that they do have the will, and then maybe others will will join.
You have also supported European Sky Shield initiative to defend Ukrainian skies as a part of this peacekeeping mission. Would it be possible also without participation of the US Air Force?
All of this is possible if you have the political will. It won't be as effective in the beginning because the U.S. has always provided not just aircraft, but also the command and control, the intelligence, all the things necessary to conduct something like these air superiority missions. But regardless, if there is a ceasefire implementation force that goes in at some point, regardless of what it looks like and how it's deployed, it will have to have air and missile defense already established before it goes into Ukraine. Otherwise, they will be vulnerable to Russian missile strikes. And I think getting this so-called Sky Shield in place first will be important if we hope to have an effective deployment of a ceasefire implementation force. People should not be somehow in the false hope or belief that Russia won't shoot at a NATO country. Soldiers deployed into Ukraine are going to be vulnerable. And so we have to go in properly armed, properly equipped, ready to deter Russia from within Ukraine.
Let's also cover breaking news from the United States. White House confirms that a journalist had been added to an unsecure group in Signal in which Trump's national security team discussed strikes on Yemen. How harmful is this incident for the U.S. national security?
Well, it's harmful in a couple of different ways. Number one, just the fact that now our adversaries know that we have leaders at the very highest level are using their cell phones on Signal to talk about the highest level classified information. I mean, this will not be the first time they will have done that. If they felt comfortable setting up a chat group and using emojis and talking about specifics about an operation that was about to happen, then obviously they've been doing it before, which means they do not have an appreciation or respect for the cumbersome procedures you're supposed to use when you're discussing highly classified information like this. So that right there tells foreign intelligence services that there's potentially opportunity where they could find a lot more information. Signal is very good, but it is not a perfect secure. Otherwise, if it was perfect, we'd all be using it all the time for classified information. The second thing is that it revealed a disdain for Europe. Now, that's not a surprise to most Europeans, but the fact that they would be making decisions and talking about Europeans, our allies, in such a way shows a gross lack of respect and also a lack of appreciation for what our allies do and provide to the United States: aerial refueling, bases, intelligence sharing, and so on. So this is dangerous for us because now allies, I think, are going to be even more reluctant to share information and share intelligence with us. They won't advertise it. They won't say, hey, U.S., sorry, we're no longer going to share with you, but they will stop sharing things. They'll begin to withhold because they'll be so concerned at this lack of discipline and unprofessional conduct at the top level. This is not good. And then the third thing, I worry there has to have been a senior officer somewhere in, even if they weren't on this chat group, if there are senior officers that are aware of these kinds of things going on, they have a duty to call it out, to say, Mr. Secretary, you cannot do this. This is, number one, it's illegal. Number two, it's a violation of all of our normal security protocols. And number three, it puts our airmen at risk. People who would be conducting the missions, it puts them at risk. And so I hope that senior officers have been pushing back on this. Otherwise, they become a part of it. people have to make their own decisions, but in normal times, a lot of people would be getting fired after this incident. There would be huge investigations. The Congress is going to have to do, congressional oversight committees should be calling for hearings, and people should be resigning. I mean, probably first of all, the National Security Advisor, and several others. If this was normal times, people would be resigning. Instead, what we see is the president saying, "I didn't know anything about this." The Secretary of Defense immediately blaming the Mr. Goldberg from the Atlantic as being, going after his credibility, even after his own department had acknowledged, or after the administration had acknowledged that this conversation did in fact happen. So I've always believed that the first principle of leadership is accepting responsibility, and I'm not seeing that right now.
And do you also expect European allies to be more reluctant to buy American weaponry after this incident and after statements from the U.S. leadership?
Yeah, I think countries make big decisions based on confidence in who they're dealing with, and I think most of our allies, unfortunately, were already beginning to be worried, and this will only add to their concern. Now, what I hope is that the administration will take appropriate action to regain the confidence of allies and partners, as well as customers. I mean, for our own economic interests, this is the duty of the administration to regain confidence, not to go after journalists and blame them.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump has directed to create an Iron Dome over the continental U.S. to protect the United States from the air threats. According to CNN, Trump has insisted that the U.S. needs to have similar to Israel's Iron Dome. What is your assessment of such a plan?
Well, of course, it is the duty of the president to protect Americans and protect our strategic interests. We need to be clear about what threats we're talking about, and the costs of doing this. And by the way, the incredible importance of Canada as a part of this defense of North America. I mean, Canada has been a part of this structure for a very long time. And so I think the effect is needed, but the capability to do that is not going to be thousands of Iron Dome missile systems. It's going to be a combination of things of air, land-based systems, and of course, a lot of this has to happen forward in Europe and in other places. So we need access that we get from our allies. And so you can't say you want to have an Iron Dome and then go around smashing relationships with our allies.
Also, President Trump announced the decision to move forward with the next generation fighter jet titled F-47. Is the price of the project worth it?
I think this is what will always be a part of the balancing act. I mean, people laughed when President Reagan talked about the Star Wars strategic defense initiative, how expensive it would be. But it was laying out the vision for that drove research and development, that drove the deployment of necessary satellites and other systems. So I'm not against it, but we need to be realistic about expectations. And again, it won't happen without support from our allies.
And let's cover our final topic. Israel is making plans for potential major ground offensive into Gaza Strip after recent airstrikes on Gaza and Lebanon. Could this lead to the end of ceasefire deal?
I'm confused. The Trump administration during the campaign before the election, Mr. Trump and his team kept talking about ending wars, to be stop wars everywhere. And instead, here we are now, 2 months into the administration, and he has not yet stopped the war, Russia's war against Ukraine. He's ramping up aggression against the Houthis, and now Israel is violating ceasefire agreements and changing the dynamics there, uh, which raises, I think, the risk of a conflict with Iran. And there's nothing about China. I mean, China was supposed to be the main strategic objective. Let's stop all this other stuff and focus on China. And so I don't see the connection. I don't see the strategy. By the way, I'm all for destroying the Houthis. I'm all for seeing Iran isolated and that regime that treats its own people so terrible, seeing it overthrown. The best way to do that, of course, is help Ukraine defeat Russia. Then Iran is isolated. It's no longer able to help Hamas. It's no longer able to help the Houthis. It's no longer able to support Hezbollah. And that would send a strong message of deterrence to China. Instead, what we see is incoherence. I don't see the strategic approach.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.